Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another one of our demystifying webinars. As you can see, I am joined by my illustrious colleagues. We have Simon Walker, Director of Training, and our senior trainers, Jonas and Elly. So today we have a nice walk in the fields, as it were. Sorry for that terrible pun. Yeah, that's what you can expect those from me if I'm going to do the presenting.
All the way through, please.
All the way through the fields. No, sorry, or the puns. Sorry. Yes, we're going to be looking today at hopefully to demystify Cinema 4D's fields. The question is, can you all hear us? I suppose that's the thing we need to make sure. We've got hello and hello from everybody, so I'm guessing so. And I guess I need to share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Okay, I need to
not yet.
The presenting then.
Hello to all our regulars, by the way, Jay, Mads, Kent, Simon, Rob, Grant, and from all those various locations, London, Rotterdam, and Newcastle, of course, as well. And
fantastic.
Thanks, Kent. It's all looking good. Good to hear.
Aye. That's brilliant. Okay, so yes, this webinar is being recorded.
Yay!
Thank you. Yeah, I just thought I'd put that out there. And we need to make sure, obviously, that you guys have access to the recordings afterwards, and they will be emailed to you an hour after the final presentations are finished, and you will be able to just go in and get any recordings. And of course, we have our links to some other recordings and features and emails and all sorts of videos that we have here from previous webinars, including, look at this one. Who's that? I wonder who that is. Is that Simon there, smack bang in the middle? I like that. Well done.
That's obviously a professional model used for some sort of a graphic thing.
Yeah, of course. So we've got our volume training program there on YouTube. Of course, for other tutorials and things like that, we have our cineversity.com login, which you can get through a subscriber account with my Maxon, and of course we have our continual demystifying webinars here, and today it seems that we will be, as you say, looking up the next level with fields. Okay, so are we all sitting comfortably?
I don't think everyone gets that reference, Matt.
No, I know, but we would, so that's fine. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my webcam and let's have a look at Cinema 4D. So inside Cinema 4D, we have, of course, various MoGraph objects that we were looking at last week. One of which I'm just going to set up exceptionally fast, because if you want to know more about MoGraph stuff, then I think you can obviously watch last week's webinar. But this one, we're going to focus specifically on something called fields. Now, what are fields, I hear you say? Fields are Cinema 4D's ability of controlling effects. They are our sort of fall-off modifiers. So I have my array of cloners here, or my array of clones, sorry, being created by a cloner, and I can affect them using effectors like we did last week. And the one I'm going to use is a plane effector. And that plane effector I'm just going to accentuate by doing 500. So my clones have all jumped up 500 centimeters in my universe. What the fall off does is choose where this occurs. And we can do that with our Cinema 4D fields. Now they exist down here in this little linear field object, which has a tiny drop down triangle, and you can see the various other fields that we can create. And the fields also exist up here as well in a separate object. But for the moment, because I want it to have its association with the plane effector, I'm going to create my linear field. Boom. Now we can see that we've got something that's, well, different to what we had. We have half of my squares are blue, cubes, sorry, are blue and up, and half of them are down. And actually about 1% of them are smack bang in the middle. This is because this is where my linear field has been created. This linear field on its own has a 100% affected area, as you can see by all of the blue squares, cubes that are above, and a 0% affected area by all of the cubes that are not affected yet, and a gradient of 0 to 100% in between. If I move my field, ding, 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 you can see I am able to affect those one line at a time because of the width of my linear field. It has a very, very tiny little dot that I can expand out, and that will increase the size of my linear field, meaning that I now have a wider area for this gradient to have an effect. And I can cause my objects to jump up or slide down depending on where the position of my linear field is. Now, this is all very well and good, and this is the sort of a behavior that you've been able to do in Cinema 4D for quite some time. But when we created fields, we gave us the ability of being able to stack fields and add more fields to a cloner than we could have before. So clicking and holding on my linear field drop down here, or my fields drop down, I can add another field. So for example, a spherical field. And I can expand that out. And now you can see I have a secondary field that is also working alongside the linear field. So wherever the spherical field is, it is doing the same thing with the clones. And at the moment, this blending layer is maxing out. So if it goes over the top of where it originally was, then the cubes don't get any further or any higher or anything like that. They are to the maximum that the effector, the plane effector, has been told to jump up. You can see the color goes a little bit interesting because the colors merge. You can control color merging via these three dots here. So in your spherical field, in your plane effector fall off tab, I can tick or untick the color, and now I can control these separately. I can untick the color completely from both of them, and then it doesn't look anywhere near as nice at this point, and you can't see what else is going on. To control the color that you want to do, then you can select on an individual field. So let's select my linear field and look at color remap, and you can see that I can swap my colors here. Please note that the color creation of the fields is random, so don't worry if yours looks different to mine. I'm quite pleased with the colors that it's selected. Normally it kind of puts mine in a very murky brown, which doesn't ever look very nice for demonstrations. But nonetheless, here we go. We've got some interesting mixes here. But the fun thing with being able to have two fields is these blending layers allow you to do different types of blending. So at the moment I was on max. Let's try minimum. So this is where the two have to be overlaying in order for the full effect to occur. We can also do subtract, which means that wherever my sphere of influence is, quite literally this field, it will undo what the linear field is actually creating. And this works, not just left and right, but also up and down as well. Because it is a spherical field, this allows you to affect all sorts of, different fall-offs and sort of different attributes depending on where your spherical field is. Very similar to the linear field, you have a 100% affected area, which is the inside of the sphere, and a 0% effect, which is the outside of the sphere. That's very easy to change. If you want to, you can just select your spherical field, you can go to remap, and then there is an invert function. So now it will only have an effect inside, which is very similar to kind of just changing the blending layers, though, to be honest, in this instance. This is where I would want to untick the color so that the geometry is having an effect here rather than anything else. You can add more and more fields if you want to. So I could add a box field into this, and again, I've got a very small area of influence, so I can expand that out. And now I have a box field that I can add back into all of this interesting setup to create something that would have been quite difficult to have created any other way before fields were accessible to us. Now, fields can come in a variety of different shapes and sizes. Of course, obviously just looked at the box field. We've got Formula 1's group fields. We've even got a random field. Now, this random field allows me to have a random distribution of my heights of my object. It is not like a random effector, which would choose a random height for this to be created, or a random position. What this is doing, this is allowing the plane effector to occur through a sense of randomness. Now, randomness, as you can see, if I move up and down, will change depending on where my random field is. A random field is actually just a selection of noises. So if I go to my plane, I can go to my view settings. You can see I have a yellow and red noise map, and that is effectively what is creating this difference in height of my objects. So wherever it is red, it is unaffected. Wherever it is yellow, it is being affected. And depending on the size of my random field, and obviously not the display box itself, but the actual noise that is being created, you can see I've got under the field, random field noise. It's got a random seed variation, which is just basically the random noise that maths is used to create this distribution. And also I've got scaling. So I can see if I make that much bigger, the scale of what I'm creating spreads out. So rather than so many different cubes being affected by a very small area, the larger your area, the more it sort of looks like it's in waves. Okay.
Matt, can I ask a question about versions? Because the fields came in a couple of versions ago, didn't they? So
R20.
Does it matter which version of R20?
Yeah.
And which version are you using?
I am currently using R23.
Is that a new version?
It is a new version, yes. It came out 2 weeks ago. And for more information on the different features of R23, please see our previous webinars. So we can affect an area. So let me just set this up. So rather than height, or actually, no, let's do height. Let's do animating height. So with my random field, let's add a loop animation speed of 50%, and let's press play. Now you can see that this animation starts to go up and down. Let's whack that up a bit so it's a bit more inviting. There we go. And this is nice. You have a loop period. If I set that to 90 frames, can you see I have a looping animation? So depending on the scale that my random field is set at will depend on how much you can make this look like waves. So with a smaller scale, there are more dots to affect these individually. With a wider scale, the yellow and red pattern that is being created over it is much bigger. So areas of clones are affected rather than just individual ones. And you say, if I make that 10,000, now we have a nice sort of wave effect being created by my random fall off of my simple plane effector. And you can do really nice things as you could with the plane effectors before. I could add in, let's choose scale. And I always like scale -1 because it makes life easy. So where it goes up and down now, it will change scale as well. And you can get some really interesting effects with this. And of course, with my plane effector, I can put back in my spherical field because I only deleted them out of my plane effector. I didn't actually delete these. And if I put my spherical field back in, let's do a max overlay. Again, I can still choose where all of this disappears as opposed to appears whilst the random effector is busy creating its own, sorry, the random field is busy creating the stuff around. Now, the fields can be used across multiple objects and of course multiple cloners. Let's create a cloner that's almost exactly the same, but this time I'm going to create spheres. And my cloner is currently being affected by the plane effector, so it's moving everything up. So I'm going to delete that so that my spheres are there instead. And I'm going to create a new effector, or actually I could just inverse. Can I inverse that? That's a good question. Let me just create another sphere. move my cloners of spheres up, and I'm going to create a, what am I doing? I'm going to create a plane effector that is going to change the scale of my spheres as well, but it's only going to create the spheres. With my fall off, because I already have a spherical field, I can put my spherical field in there, and now if I move my spherical field, I have one spherical field that is changing the scale of the spheres in one cloner, as well as the clones in the cloner below. So you can have all sorts of different cloners, all sorts of different MoGraph generators, everything that we experimented with the other week with all of these being controlled by the same field doing various different things. In fact, fields exist across so many different areas of Cinema 4D. And let me load my fields use cases. Thank you, Jonas. You will be able to see that my spherical field here is having an effect on MoGraph objects here. If I move my spherical field further along, it is now having an effect on a deformer, a displacement deformer that exists on this plane, but nonetheless, the same spherical field is having an effect on that. You can also use fields to affect vertex maps, which means that you can control all sorts of other interesting animations, crossovers, and things which I believe Elly and Jonas will be experimenting with in a bit. And then I can move it further across, and I can affect polygon selections, which would allow different materials to become visible depending on where it is. I can control point selections, which means that under my point selection, I have bevels that are being applied to my object only where my spherical field is. I can go to volumes. So my volumes of my fields can be created. And if you do that with a random field, then you get some really interesting results. And if I move this across to my dynamics, oh, you can see nothing happens. This is because you need to make sure you press play. And now wherever my spherical field is, I can have an effect on the volumes, effect on the dynamics of an object or a scene setup. Okay, that's me done with my basic introduction. I don't know if anybody wants to ask some questions, or if Jonas and Elly have anything that you wish to add to that before I pass it over to you guys.
Well, nothing to add from my side.
Marvelous, that's good to know. Elly?
No, that was great. That was all good.
It might be worth just quickly covering a couple of the things that were asked. Jay's had a couple of interesting questions, just in case somebody's watching a recording and they can't see the questions list, because I know they've been answered live, but it just might be interesting to mention those.
Okay, what questions have we got that
right.
you'd like me to answer? Sorry.
Can you see the questions field, or I can read them out if you like?
I can. I was just wondering if there's anything specific. If adding multiple fields to a cache, no doubt they would be render intensive. The intensity to calculate fields highly depends on the fields that you use. So yeah, it's very kind of scene dependent. It depends what you've got set up really, as to how intense your rendering or calculation stuff will need to be. Do fields act differently in order of stacking? Yes. So depending on the order that you have them and the blend modes that you've got here under your fall off will depend on how these work. So if I reverse these, I will get a different result. So you can get some really interesting results. It's well worth playing with orders and blend shapes and blend modes, sorry, depending on what you are wanting to get. What else? Does the plane and random field effector work with other techniques like Octane? Octane apparently scatters onto Cinema 4D objects. I'm obviously not sure. I don't really use Octane, unfortunately. I don't have much experience with the third-party plugins. Can the properties of a field be affected by another field? And I don't use that, but Jonas, I'm assuming that would be where subfields comes into play.
Yeah, exactly. So yes, that is possible for some of the parameters, but not for all of them. Yeah, we just exposed that for parameters where it makes sense, but you will see an example for that later in
Marvelous.
this session.
Okay. We've had the question, can the example project be downloaded for tinkering? Jonas, I think that means your wonderful scene setup. Is that okay to go to the customers?
Totally, yes.
Okay, marvelous. So we will make sure that Simon gets that to add that to the email. Right, okay, so that's me done, and I will be in the background answering questions. Who am I passing it to?
Well, I first would like to show the group fields, and then I will pass on to Elly.
Marvelous.
Yep.
Okay, so bear with me a second. I will pass it over to you. Thank you very much.
So here we go. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. Perfect. So what we have here is a small little setup where I've got a spherical field and a plane effector, and also a box field that I can rotate here in the middle. And I want to use the very same fields that I use here in the plane effector, like this field stack, in the random effector here. Right now you can see that the random effector just affects everything by default. And of course, you could just right click on the fields parameter here and go copy, and then go to the random effector and just paste it. And then you would have the effect that you might want to have, so that you are controlling multiple fields using these two, multiple effectors using these two fields, like so. But there is even, well, a better way, because what if you want to add something to the stack here, but for both effectors? And this is where the group field comes into play. So let's go to the fields menu and let's create a group field. And in the group field, I will also just paste what I just copied. So now we've got the two fields in here, and this is why I can just delete them from the other fields lists here. Okay, here the group field is already applied. Let me get rid of these two. Hello. Just put them out here. And let's delete everything. And now, instead of assigning the box field and the spherical field, we just assign the group field here. And we do the very same thing with the random field. We just assign the group field. And because the box field and the spherical field are part of that group field, these fields will now have a weight on both effectors. And the cool thing is, if I now want to add another field, like a linear field, for example, to this list, this field will be automatically applied to both effectors because it is part of the group field, and the group field is linked to these two effectors. That's basically what I wanted to show, that there's the group field and that you can use that to use the very same setup, maybe a setup that you want to adjust at some point, in multiple effectors. All right, I will show you another use case for this later. For now, I will just pass on to Elly.
Yep.
Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
You're ready, that's good. Here you go.
Cool. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Perfect.
Yes.
Cool.
Yeah,
Thanks.
absolutely.
Cool. So as Matt showed in his examples, there's a way you can kind of use fields within like vertex maps and control like displacement. So this is a little setup where if I play it, you get like this kind of really cool looking organic growth, and this is using fields and vertex maps and displacement. So I thought I'd run through how to set this up, and then I'm going to throw it over to Jonas, who's going to then show how he can use this vertex map to trigger like some animation. I think that's right. Right, so let me show quickly how I set this up. So grab yourself a plane, got to increase the segments, and then come in here, and then hit C just to make it editable. And I'm going to grab some of the points. So I'll just grab just these ones here. Then we can set the vertex weight, and here we've now got our vertex tag, and you can see our selection is just these like this yellow part here. And what's cool, if we go up to our tag, there's a little option here to use fields. So if we check that, you see your fields menu pop up, and by default it creates a modifier, which is a freeze modifier, and that's coincidentally the one that we need, because one of the modes is grow. So if I change that and if I play, you can see how the freeze modifier within our like fields menu is affecting our vertex map selection, and it's growing it in quite like a cool way. And we can then use this like vertex map to then trigger things like displacement. But let's make it a little bit more interesting. At the moment it's a little bit of like a plain grow. So if we select like a random field, just make that a child, and then change that to normal, and let's change this to something like 500. And then now you see it's kind of growing. The vertex weight is growing depending on like the noise of the random field, so it looks sort of like much more interesting than just kind of like the basic growth before. And then what we can do with this, we can actually smooth out these edges, and if we just duplicate our vertex map, delete everything from in there, and you can actually drag and drop your original vertex map in there. And if we change that to average, what you have to do is you have to rename your vertex maps, this to kick in. There we go. So now we can see how that's affecting that, and let's change that to something like 20. So this is now creating like a smoother edge, and so when we add like some displacement, you won't get like those jagged edges. Instead it will be nice and smooth. So that's just a little trick that Jonas showed me. Thanks for that, Jonas. Cool. So let's add a bit of displacement now on this. So if I grab my displacer, I'll make it a child of my plane. Within here, I'm going to select color and just change that to fully black. And then in the fall off, we can actually just drag and drop our vertex map. And hopefully you can see the vertex map is actually controlling the displacer. So if I come back and press play, we've now got this really cool like organic growth. It looks like really nice, and that's all based on the vertex map that's being controlled by the fields. Then what I did, I shoved it into a subdivision surface just to create some smoothing. The playback is going to be a little bit slower because of the high poly count, but for like a final render, obviously the smoother it is, the nicer it can look. And then we can grab
Elly, can you just scrub slowly through that? Because we're getting a bit of a drop off because of the webinar of the frames per second. Is it possible just to scrub along the timeline to see how it progresses?
I thought it might be a little bit. Is that showing it a little better?
Yeah, that's better.
Yeah, to be fair, I can do it with the subdivision surface off. That's not like a massive. You still sort
Try
of see it
hiding the points as well, so that you're not displaying the lines. It might respond a bit faster.
Yeah, new house, new internet. not doing wonders for me, is it? Right, so I've got my second displacer. So if I make that a child, what we can do, we can then add like a noise to this one, which is what I did before. turn that global scale down, and then we can, in the fall off again, drag our second vertex map. Let's do sort of like that. And so now if I come back, like, let me turn this, oh, it's not going to play back, is it, very well? If I play it and then I'll stop it just to show. So you're getting this grow, and then it's sort of growing with the displacement as well. I'm hoping that's at least partially played back. So that's all being controlled by these vertex maps here. So sort of like that. And then the next thing we can do, we can actually use this same vertex map to kind of affect the color. So if we create a material and then go to effects and then vertex map, you can then drag and drop your vertex map into there. Oh, let me apply that first. And then you can add a colorizer. And then this is when it starts to get quite cool, because we can affect the colors. If I, you know me, I love my pink. So now it's got like a pink glowy outline. And that's, again, literally using the same vertex map. Let's have a little do-do-do, make this look nice. So yeah, that was kind of it. And I did a couple of renders earlier, and this was sort of one of them. And this is the exact same project, just added a light. And then I did a secondary one. It was a bit lower, a bit of depth of field. Yeah, so it's quite a cool effect you can use with fields. Like, it doesn't just need to be like the MoGraph stuff. Yeah, fields can be used for so many things. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to throw this exact project over to Jonas, and he's going to show you how you can use this to like trigger some animation. Is that right?
That's very cool, Elly. Also, it's fantastic how quick that is to set up for like a fly through or ideas and backgrounds. It's really great.
Yeah, it's a very quick setup. Yeah, with some cool outcome. Cool. So Jonas, you ready?
I'm ready.
Some cool stuff. Let me.
You mean some more cool stuff?
Some even more cool stuff.
All right. Can you see my screen? Should be the same scene as Elly just showed you. I just deactivated the subdivision surface here, and just to get some better feedback in the viewport. And what I want to show you is how I created an effect that looks like this. So this is basically the same thing as Elly showed already, but what I did then, so here in the background, you can see this is the growth effect underneath or beneath the street. But then I used the same vertex map to trigger the dynamics of fracturing. And this is what I'm going to show you now. So first of all, of course, we need something to fracture, and the best thing to fracture, and also the easiest, is a cube. And I'm gonna set this up so that it's 400 by 6 by 400, something like that. And I'm gonna move it up by 3 centimeters. Here we go. So now we've got like a little bit of thickness on top of that plane with the vertex map effect on it. And then I'm going to go to the MoGraph menu and just create a Voronoi fracture. I hold down Alt because I've got the cube selected, and this way it will automatically create the Voronoi fracture as a parent of the cube, and it will start fracturing it. In the Voronoi fracturing, I go to the Sources tab, and just select the point generator here, which is in there by default, and just crank up the point amount, which is pretty much similar to the amount of fragments here. And now I've got this thing fractured. All right, so the next thing I want to do is I create a simulation tag, Rigidbody, and if I do that and play back the animation again, you see that everything is just falling down. You can see it down here, and the effect is starting here, and they are not connected. Okay, so how can we connect these? In the dynamics tag, you see that there are two fields here that are asking for a MoGraph selection. One is for the enabled, so that you can enable dynamics using a MoGraph selection, and the other one is to set the dynamic state for the MoGraph selection, which means if it's set to on, an object will completely behave dynamically and fly around and so on. And if it's set to off, objects can collide with this, but it won't fly around, for example. Okay, so how can I get this MoGraph selection here? Well, it's actually not that hard. We just have to go to the MoGraph menu here, and then we go to MoGraph selection. And now you see that there are these brown dots here, and I just select one of these because these are selections, or yeah, the selection points for the fragments. So now you see I got this one selected, and the cool thing is, as with the vertex map, there is a checkbox which is called use fields. It's a tiny little checkbox, but once you check it, you've got the full power of the field system here. So we just delete the freeze field because the freeze field just stores the values that have been in the system when you created this. So the selection of this one here, I'm going to delete this. We don't need that anymore. And instead, I'm going to drag and drop the vertex map in here. So now we've got the vertex map, and let me also make the attributes manager a little bit bigger. And in here, you can see that the mode is set to nearest, and that's exactly what we need, because if I press play now, you can see, oh, maybe let me just delete the dynamics for now so we can see the selection growing. Here you can see that the selection is growing along the same path or pattern that the vertex map is growing. Another thing that you might have seen is that some of these points are flickering, which means that they belong to the selection at one frame and maybe not at the next frame, and then again on the next frame. So I want to make sure that once they got selected, that they stay selected. And you can do this by using a field that is called Decay Field. So in here, in the very right menu here, we've got the modifier layers. And these can be used to remap some values or to do something with the weights that we created before. And in this case, I just want to add a decay. And the decay is set to 50%. And once I set this to 100%, everything that has been selected once will stay selected. Let me go to the very first frame. Here we go. And we also need to make that Voronoi fracture, or we need to place it down the hierarchy because of the execution order here. So first of all, these vertex maps are being created. And then as it goes down here, after that, this MoGraph selection will be created. This is why we have to place it beneath the vertex maps. So again, here we go. The vertex map is growing, and you can see that there is no flickering anymore. And now we can use this MoGraph selection to trigger the dynamics. So let's create a simulation tag, Rigidbody again. And now let's just input the MoGraph selection into the dynamic field here. And I will also swap the two here just in case. And now, if I hit play, you can see that the pieces are falling down similar to the vertex map here, which is pretty cool. But maybe we want them to fly up and to have some, yeah, a little bit more variation applied. So the first thing I want to do is I go to Edit, Project Settings, and in here there is a Dynamics tab, and we've got a gravity setting in here, which is the default gravity, and I will type in -200, which means that the gravity is now going upwards. So now these pieces are starting to float around. And then the next thing I want to add is in the simulation menu, I go to Forces and I add some wind. And in the Object tab, I just bring up the wind speed a little bit and also the turbulence, let's say to 20%, something like that. And that is basically the setup here. Yeah, and if you spend a little bit more time and tweak it a little bit more, then you can create something like that. Just scrub through it. Here you can see it. Very cool. All right. So that's this
Very
setup.
nice. Excellent.
And I want to give it back to you, Elly. So,
Yep.
Are you ready?
I am ready.
You are ready.
That's
awesome. All right. Here you go.
Cool. Thank you very much. Cool. So I wanted to show a cool effect using like the field force stuff in Cinema 4D, and this came in R21. And I guess kind of without going too much into it, it's a way of using fields along with like the MoGraph tools, but I'm going to use it with like particle emitters to create, let me find, something like this. So hopefully you can see that it says the word Maxon, and then also like this one that says field for today's webinar. Yeah, so I'm going to run through this like relatively quickly because there's quite a few steps. But what I'll do, I'll add the project file to like this link that you guys will get kind of an hour at the end of this session, so you guys can break it down. And what's nice is it's procedural, so you can change the text to say whatever you want and just change it a couple of settings. So I'll run through how I made this, and I've also got a little animation that I rendered of it as well, just to show. Hopefully it's playing back well. So
It's awesome.
yeah,
it's really nice.
Yeah, okay, cool. Right, so let me show you how I set this up. So grab myself a text spline and just write the word Maxon. So I'm going to keep this like default font because it's nice and thin, which is what we need anyway. And then in Simulate, we can go to Particles and go to Emitter. And then I need this to be kind of like the width of my text, and then like nice and small, nice and thin. Bring it up to the middle. Let me just increase some frames. I'm gonna just keyframe some rotation. So keyframe at 0, and then at 90, just gonna do some 360 rotation. Oh, where am I going there? And then keyframe that. So now when I press play, my emitter should rotate 360 degrees, firing particles everywhere, which doesn't look too great at the moment, but it's getting there. So with my emitter, we can now add our new-ish field force. And one of the options, let me just hide that. One of the options we have in the object mode, as you can see, it's sort of like similar to the field menu. You can change direction, and you can actually drag and drop your text into here. And then if we click our text, we want it to go like along, which is what this is set to, along the spline. So now if I press play, you can see the particles are sort of following along the spline. Let me increase these, it might show it a bit better. So they're now sort of following along. And in our emitter, let's change a couple of these settings just to make it look a bit nicer. So I want the emission to stop at 90 frames. I want them to last 90 frames, but I'm going to add a little bit of variation just so some kind of like die at different times. And then the speed, that's a bit too quick. And then a bit more variation on that as well. And it should look a little bit nicer. And so once we've got our particles moving where we want them to, let me just hide my emitter, we can actually use a tracer, which I think we sort of went through a couple of weeks ago in the first webinar. And we can actually trace the paths of these, of like the particles, and it will eventually then spell out like the letters. So if I grab myself, if I know what I'm doing, tracer, change a couple of these settings. Oh. Right, and now, so now it's tracing the path, which are particles sort of like spelling out the word Maxon. And you could, let's say, like we could, if you wanted more lines, you just need more particles to increase that to 100. And you can see it much clearer there. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to do 50, and then I'm going to duplicate my emitter and my tracer. And then in my emitter, I'm just going to change the seed. So now I've got 100 particles, and therefore I've got 100 of my kind of traced paths. But because the seed of the two emitters is different, the lines will then kind of be in different places. So instead of having 100 all in the same place, I've now got 100 of them in kind of slightly different areas. And so this alone, I think actually looks quite cool. So as we learned a couple of weeks ago, this won't show up in a render. So you need to create a hair material. Let me just quickly do, I'll just get rid of that. And if you drag that onto your tracer and my other one. So that's already, I think, looking like kind of cool. But there's now what we can do, we can use like some of the MoGraph tools to turn this into some geometry and add some like squares, and that can be controlled in the fields menu with the tracer. And I'll sort of show how we can do that. So if we grab like a matrix in the MoGraph menu, I'm just going to rotate that. And we just need this to fill the same sort of area that our text spline's filling. So if we come into here and go to endpoint and drag that over. So as long as it's filling that area, that's all we need it to do. So what do we reckon, 30 maybe? Okay, let's go to that. And then 50, 60. Okay, cool, I'll leave it at that. So with our matrix selected, we can then, because it's a MoGraph generator, we can then use an effector. So we can grab our plane effector, get rid of the position, and our scale we can go to -1. And what we can do within the fields menu of the plane effector, we can actually, if we drop in a solid, we can then put our tracer in there, and you can see it's now kind of following along with our tracer. If we go to down in our layer controls, select radius and then subtract, our matrix is now forming along with our tracer and our like emitted particles. And I think like this looks quite like a cool look. And you can affect things like the radius. So if you want to see like more of the matrix or less, you can bring that back down. And of course you can mess with the blending options. You can also drag and drop the other tracer in there. What I'll do, so as well, the matrix doesn't show up as geometry, much like the tracer. But what we can do, we can grab a cloner and a cube. And let me just do this 8 by 8 by 8. Do a little fillet on here. Drop my cube into my cloner. If we set our cloner to object mode and then drop our matrix in here, hide our matrix, and now hit render. They're a bit too small at the moment. So back into my plane, I increase this up here. So now we have the geometry, which is my cloner. And so if and this is all I did, and then just added a new material. What should we have? Let's have sort of this kind of red. As you can see, normally my materials are all basically the same settings every time, but it works. Let's make that a little bit redder. Redder, more red. And then why isn't that showing? Any ideas, Jonas, on that? Why this isn't showing?
Maybe.
So
if you
let me play this one. Let's just cancel that. Oh, this one will show it. So let's just pretend I've just done this one now and it hasn't gone wrong in the other scene. And so when we hit render, if only we could cut this out, but it's live. So when we hit render,
no one noticed, Elly, it's fine.
no, we'll just, can we not cut it out? No, before it goes on YouTube.
Well, now you can see that they actually showed up. They have been just.
This is the different scene.
Right. Yeah.
So
Sorry.
This is what should happen. I'm not too sure what's happened on my other one. But yeah, so once this is
that file while it renders, and we'll see if we can sort it, because that's quite interesting. If anyone's following along, they might have the same problem.
Yeah, I mean, I've made this about 8 times today, and not once has this happened. So of course it's happened right now.
On the live one, yeah.
On the live one, of course it has.
The first thing I would check is the instance mode, actually, on the cloner. Well, that should work.
Yeah.
The second thing I would try is not to use the matrix, but just create a cloner grid.
Were you trying to render because the tracer can't render to the picture view of what it sees? It's a simulation, so it needs to start from the beginning, in theory.
Yeah, but the concern is that the cubes aren't showing of the cloner, which I thought should. I mean, for people who are watching, this is then what the final output will look like. And so it sort of like spells out the word Maxon, and you can increase like the amount of emitted particles if you wanted to kind of have like the trace lines be a bit more prominent. So yeah, that's that. No,
yeah, I think Matt is right. Try just rendering to the picture viewer, to the viewport. Let's see if it works now. There we go. Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah.
So this is an issue that we discussed the other day when it comes to the tracer. The tracer is a simulation that the viewport doesn't know how to just kind of jump in the middle of. So because loads of this stuff is dependent on the tracer, Cinema 4D's external renderer needs to think about the simulation from the beginning. So if we were to render out the animation, it would work fine. But just trying to pick an individual frame in the middle of the animation, the external renderer goes, I don't know where I am, and panics.
Cool. Well, yeah, so that was that effect. And what's nice about it is you can go into your text spline, you can change this, and it will update in its time. So if I do like fields, it's then clever enough to, so it might need kind of like the matrix or the emitters being extended a little bit, because I think this is perhaps a bit bigger than the actual word Maxon. But yeah, aside from the render issue, I hope you guys liked that that effect. And so I guess if there's no questions, Jonas, did you want to show something quick with some volume stuff?
Yeah, there was one question.
We did have a couple of questions. Yeah.
So the
Sorry.
question was, can you explain what the solid is doing there? You had one fields layer, one field setup where you created a solid.
Was it the matrix?
I think it was in the matrix.
The plane.
Here you go.
Oh, yeah, there it is.
Do you know what? I'm going to be honest. I'm not too sure what the solid actually does. I don't know whether either of the guys know.
I have to say, I was wondering the same thing. Can you just get rid of it and just have the blending mode of subtract as normal? No, because I suppose it's got nothing to subtract from.
I wonder whether the solid is what helps the tracer turn into actual kind of solid information that, do you see what I mean? That can then be like followed along with the effector.
Jonas?
He is the expert.
So you get white and you subtract that. Well, I actually think that you could delete the solid and somehow recreate the. Okay, now select the tracer and go to remapping.
Remapping and invert. Yeah.
Exactly, and invert the whole thing. There's a checkbox
Bottom right-hand corner.
on the right.
Oh, my webinar was on the way.
There we go.
There you go.
Here we go.
So multiple ways of doing the same thing, which is what we love in Cinema 4D.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, there are so many ways of doing stuff. And yeah, it's always cool to see how other people use it and create this cool stuff with.
Cool. So yeah, Jonas?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Yeah.
I got 2 minutes. That's gonna be tough.
2 minutes. Go for it.
I'm really, yeah, sorry. I guess I didn't stick to my 10 minutes very well, did I?
No worries.
It's great. Also, there's been lots of comments about saying how useful it is at seeing things when they don't go right, and how you then think through the operation and how you might fix them and the workarounds. And I think that's as useful as showing the techniques as well. So thanks everyone, and Kent and Rob and Glenn, and a couple of the others have also been saying that.
Me going wrong,
and Jonathan
guys.
as well. So yes. No, this is planned. We deliberately did this.
Oh yeah, this happened on purpose. I meant to do it wrong.
Perfect. So yeah, in the next setup, I want to show you how to turn a field into a mesh. And what I created here is this. So it might be a little bit, well, less than 30 frames per second in the playback. But if I scrub through it slowly, you can see that we've got an animated noise here, which is meshed. And this is the viewport renderer, so there is no post involved. And all of the nice glow in here has been created using Magic Bullet looks inside of Cinema 4D. Okay, but now let me show you how I created this. And I'm gonna start from scratch here. So the first thing we need is a random field. So we create a random field. And if we go to the view settings and enable the view plane preview, you can see that this is what the noise is going to look like. Now, if I scale this up, you can see that we've got a bigger noise. And if I increase the animation speed and hit play, you can also see that this is animating now. And this is the interesting point. All right, now let's turn that off, and let's turn this whole thing into geometry. And the easiest way to do that, and actually also the only way that I know, is to use our OpenVDB stuff, the volume builder and the volume measure. So let's hold down Alt and create the volume builder, because we got the random field already selected. And this way it creates the volume builder as the parent. And then I'm also, again, going to hold down Alt. Sorry?
Minecraft noise.
Yeah, exactly. And here we go. So this is already a meshed noise. So you can see that, yeah, it's doing something. Let me just, well, also do something to the voxel size. With volumes, well, volumes are based on voxels, and voxels are like three-dimensional pixels. And in the volume builder, we've got a parameter called voxel size, which is set to 10 centimeters. If I bring that down, I increase the density of the voxel grid. And now you see that all of the edges are getting a little bit sharper and so on. You can also see that the performance is not as good as before anymore, because we've got 8 times more stuff to calculate. But here's the thing: if you want to mesh a volume, if you want to mesh a field, then you need to set the volume type to fog. So the technical background of this is that in a fog volume, every single voxel stores a value between 0 and 1, and this is basically the very same thing as with the fields, because fields are weights. They store values between 0 and 100%, which is the same as the range between 0 and 1. Okay, so here we go. That's basically the whole thing, but I want to set it up a little bit more, like in a little bit more flexible way. So if I let me just create a smooth filter here, and let me create a copy of this whole thing, and in the second random field in the remapping, I just choose invert, so that we get these two parts here. And so you can see they are not intersecting each other, but it's just two parts. And if I want to change the movement or the animation, for example, or the size of the noise, I always have to go, or I always have to select both of the random fields and adjust both of them so that the values match up. But there is a way that you can use to make it all like more flexible, and also that you just have to use or to adjust stuff in one place. So let me get rid of one of these setups here, and let's also go to the volume builder, and let's get rid of the fog smooth, and let's also just drag and drop the random field out of here, and this way we don't see anything anymore. So why am I doing this? Because I want to use this group field here again. Remember, we had that earlier. In the group field, you can assign or apply a field, and this field or this group field can then be shared within multiple setups, and whatever you change in here in the field list will be inherited by all of the other setups, and this is exactly what we want here. So now we set up one of the 3 elements that we had before. So let me just go to the rendering here again. We've got 3 elements. We've got the white one, the black one, and the golden one. And all of these are being controlled by using the same noise. So the next thing I want to do here is to create another modifier layer, and I will use the curve layer. So I'm going to remap the whole thing. First of all, I right-click this spline interface here and set the spline preset here to linear. And then let me just create a step here, something like that. It doesn't look too impressive right now, but we will create the counterparts to that in a second. Okay, now we've got the group field set up. And in the volume builder, we are missing the smooth part. And we can do this by creating the smooth filter layer here, but this only works in one volume builder. So instead, I'm going to go to the volume menu here and create a fog smooth object. So here we go. In the volume builder, I'm just going to drag and drop it inside here. And then I can go to the filter tab and just have a look at the settings. Let's just go down with the voxel size for now. So this is our first noise that we created as geometry. Right now, it doesn't look too impressive, but if I now create a copy of this one, and I'm going to rename these here. So this is my prime fog smooth, and this is my, what did I write here? Prime, and this is also my primary random field, prime. And now I'm going to create a copy of this volume measure. And the only thing that I have to adjust now is in the group field. Remember, the random field is in all of the group fields now, but the curve is just a part of, well, this, of exactly this group field here. This one, the random field, has been shared. It's like an instance of this primary random field, and this curve belongs to this group field. So what I can do now is I bring that over to something like that, and I create a few more points here, like so, so that I just grab the middle part. So we are basically remapping the whole thing, that we're just showing values from the random field here that are between 50 and 60% now, if that makes sense. And now, if I hit play, you can see that this is already working, and now we just need a third one of these setups. So I'm just going to create another copy and go to the group field and adjust the remapping here. So I'm going to delete these two and move the other ones over so that we have something like this. And this is already the whole setup. So now we've got the three parts, and maybe I can make this more visible simply by creating a new material and applying it to this one. And then I create a copy of this, adjust the color like so, and apply it to this one. And then for the middle one, I'm just going to go to the node material presets and create a gold material. And here we go. So these are our three parts. And the cool thing now is that I can now go to the random field, to my primary random field. And for example, I can go down with the scale, let's say 500. Then I've got this. Or I can up this again and go to the smooth here. And under filter, I just increase the voxel distance, which will also increase the smoothness here. I can drag the slider, and you can see that the smooth effect is been applied in all of the three setups here. So this is a quite powerful setup, and of course we could add multiple more, and simply by using another range here in the curve adjustment layer, yeah, we can remap the values of the noise to anything that we would like to have. All right, so that's basically it. Are there any questions? Hello?
I don't think so.
It seems not. Sorry. I was just checking.
We were all waiting for everyone else to comment.
No, it was, yeah. We want to talk over each other.
Absolutely, and
awesome.
we appreciate everyone staying with us for the extra 10 minutes or so that we slightly overran. But of course, we never overrun.
Never.
This time is
Never.
flexible.
We finish exactly when we mean to.
Yes, a trainer does exactly that. Very good.
Some other questions
Excellent.
coming.
Would you mind?
Sorry,
Okay.
can you use another model instead of a cube? In this
Yes.
instance, yeah, we're just using a field in order to create this. But yeah, you can do this. You can overlay this with all sorts of different objects if you want to.
Yeah.
So if you look in the content browser, we've even got a nice one to do with text, which is quite clever. So
let me just see if I have this here.
How would you linear transition from one fully solid material to reveal these different materials? You could have several. You could have another builder, another volume builder that you have a different field on an effect, and you would use a field to reveal that by slowly removing the volumes and the voxels from that effect. Would be a reveal, couldn't you? You could kind of peel stuff away and have these materials underneath, would be one way of doing it.
Yeah. So, but regarding the other question, let me go back to the other setup that I just created. In the volume builder, we just assigned this group field here. And by default, the creation space is a box. But if I now want this to be like, let's say, a sphere, we can just drag and drop the sphere in here. Let's do this here on the first one. We can drag and drop the sphere in here and put it at the very bottom. And then we just set the group field here, not to creation space box, but to objects below. Now, if I make the sphere invisible, you can see that the white parts are restricted by the sphere. There's also a very flexible way to set this up. You could, for example, create an instance of the sphere and then create another instance and put this instance into the volume builders. And then you've got one instance object where you could just swap the objects. And then it could be the sphere, the torus, the figure. It could be everything.
Cool. Is there an advantage to using instance objects as opposed to just dragging and dropping the sphere into the volume mesher? Because I don't know if guys have noticed that, but there are two different ways that you can put the sphere or an object in a volume builder. You can drag and drop it so it is a child, but you can also just have a live link as well, just by dragging and dropping it into the object information of the builder.
The problem with the live link is that once you deactivate or once you make the object invisible, at least if I remember correctly, it will also be invisible in the volume builder. That's why I always try to put them into the volume builder. And yeah, this way I can just make like the instances invisible. Maybe I should show it. Just takes another 20 minutes, hey. No, I'm kidding. It doesn't take so long. So let me select the sphere here and just create an instance object. And we call this place your object here. And then we create an instance of that one. Here we go. And this instance is going to be a child of all of our volume builders. And in the volume builders, we have to place it at the bottom and set all group fields to objects below. We just have to set this up once. Once it is set up, it is pretty powerful, actually. So here we go. This is our sphere. And yeah, now I can just create, let's say, a torus. And I'm also going to make this invisible. And then I just drag and drop the torus into this reference object link field here. And now you see that the whole thing is a torus. And yeah, now we can do this with any object, like also with the figure. Let's just scale this guy up a little bit and make it invisible and just place it in here. And you can see this is my figure with the very same effect applied to it.
Modern art there, I think.
So this is quite a powerful way to set up things if you need to stay flexible, or if you need to animate the overall shape. I mean, this could also be some animated stuff that you also created with fields and volumes and so on, and or just some cache object coming from Alembic or OBJ and whatnot. And then you could use this as the overall shape for that effect, and yeah, can create really cool effects with that. But that's
Great
really
stuff.
everything I wanted to show.
Excellent. Matt, would you mind just giving everyone a reminder about where they can see the recordings for this and the previous sessions, and just showing your screen quickly?
I'm just going to pass it to Matt.
Cool, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Here you go.
So there we go. For the people that were asking, you can find our previous webinars. So for those of you who think that they've got a setup to remember, you can don't have to remember it. You can in fact just watch it again up here on our Maxon volume program training YouTube channel. Okay, and don't forget, of course, that we've got various tutorials over in Cineversity, although that still says look at what's new in R20. And looking at our Red Giant webinars, you can see that
refresh the page.
Yeah, I might need to refresh that. Next week, join us again for looking at fracturing in motion graphics. Okay.
We had one question earlier on about what we're doing for October, so I just wanted to jump in. We've got a whole program for every Monday for the rest of the year, and in October we're heavily featuring doing fast graphics on the timeline, whether that's Premiere Pro or After Effects or in fact Avid Media Composer, and how to swap graphics between those and so on. So I will post more information, and we'll definitely have that all up online by the time next week, and we can talk a little bit more about that when we talk about the last session that we've got next Monday on the 28th. But just to let you know, yes, we're just slightly behind in publishing it on the page, but we're going to continue this for at least the rest of the year, and most likely into next year too, every Monday.
Fantastic. Okay, right. Well, if that's it, thank you very much all for joining us, and we will see you all again next week.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Thanks
Bye-bye.
for all the kind comments as well. We really appreciate them.
We do. Thank you very much. Take care, guys. Stay safe out there. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.